Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Not the worst, but one that sticks out that they did to themselves. Woman shows up to court in a Ritz party tie matches, drink up, t-shirt. She was there for her first appearance on a third DUI charge. Judge was not in a humorous mood that day. Not a lawyer, but when my Phil and Mill got divorced, she wanted to file jointly for the previous year because they were still married. They would have gotten a decent refund. He insisted on filing separately, despite the fact that he would owe $4,000, because he wanted her to also owe the IRS. He did it to frost her ass. There's a lawyer in my town who has a reputation for being a real D. He left a very successful firm to go off on his own. He and the firm negotiated which clients he would take and how eventual fees from those clients would be divided. All seemed fine and dandy. As soon as he is out the door, he sues his old firm, saying the deal is unenforceable and that he should 100% of the fees from the clients who came with him. He lost and appealed, lost again and appealed to the state Supreme Court, where they shut his ass down and, in extremely diplomatic language, pretty much called him a D. More of a case of screwing himself over, but here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with sexual assault of a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise. Defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from not being old enough to consent, sex with the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had sex with her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years. The maximum possible as charged was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. One time, I saw an indigent defendant who was in custody tell the judge his public defender wasn't working hard enough and he wanted the judge to appoint different counsel. The judge asked him what specifically was the problem and he said, "I don't want a female lawyer. I need a man who can take charge and fight for me," or something very similar to that. The judge, also female, said that's not how it works. Then he started yelling and getting into specifics about his public defender. Just mainly, "I don't like her. She won't visit me, etc." The judge is annoyed and looks at him and is like, "Fine, I'll appoint another attorney for you. But because you are not satisfied with your attorney and I need time to appoint you new counsel, I am not going to hear any other issues today and will reset your case." A few days later, the judge sends defendant notice of his new appointed attorney, who happens to also be female, and notice of the case reset for 6 weeks. The case was originally set for a bond hearing and the DA and his PD had agreed to release him on an unsecured bond, meaning he would have gotten out that day if he hadn't thrown his temper tantrum. Instead, he waited another 6 weeks in jail just to have another female attorney represent. Not my case, but still my favorite story. Dude screwed himself over when he went to jury trial for a burglary charge and wore the same distinct sweatshirt he wore the night he committed the crime. Kind of hard to argue the guy in the video isn't your client at that point. Needless to say, he was convicted and spent a few years in dock. Sitting waiting for my client and the judge is giving a mass colloquy for an alternative program on a DUI. Basically probation. Question: has anyone consumed alcohol or taken drugs in the last 24 hours? Obvious answer aside, one dude proudly raises his hand. "I smoked some dope last night." He did not get probation. This wasn't my case but followed it closely because it was an acquaintance's divorce proceedings. He and his now ex-wife shared some commercial property that was worth some dough. They were both on the paperwork, had access to the same info. Well, some it hit the fan and the property was in arrears and I think some lien was filed. The husband would try to talk to his then wife about the whole thing and she would blow him off. Not only would she ignore him and the finances, she started cheating on him. Fast forward to divorce. It's contentious and they get down to fighting for the primary residence whose market value, unencumbered, is much less than the commercial building. She demanded the house and the husband effectively offered to give her the commercial building if he could keep the residence. She never paid attention to how bad off the commercial building was, and for some strange reason her lawyer didn't do any due diligence, so they took the deal. I don't know if the asset allocation included any saving conditions or caveats for the ex-wife, but I did like to see that her own disinterest may have led to bargaining for an underwater property instead of a paid off house. I am being sparse on details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of a very nasty sexual offense. He had an alibi, he was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I'm being careful, so I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim. And so the employee quite candidly tells me, "Oh, yeah, he was definitely at work, but that's not what I'll say in court. Duck that guy. He is going down." I did not call him as a witness or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial. But if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been ducked hard. 6 offender registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent. Not a lawyer, but this story always gets me. My biological grandmother died 20 years ago of ovarian cancer. She left all her money, trusts, bonds to my grandfather to use while alive and disperse after death. My grandfather remarried something like 15 years ago to my step-grandma. My grandfather ended up dying first a few years back. My step-aunt is a greedy itch who lives on the opposite side of the country. She's lived off of her mother and my grandfather for all of her life. She'd come over and take them on vacation where she'd use their money to buy herself things and get a free skiing trip about 8x a year. After my grandfather passed, my step-grandma had to move where her children live to get care for dementia. My step-aunt has access to not only her own mother's estate but my grandfather's as well to take care of her needs. That wasn't enough. She decided to try and sue my dad and uncle for their dead biological mother's estate. My dad is bilaterally paralyzed and in a wheelchair. My uncle is a triple bypass survivor with a pacemaker and multiple stents. Both are on fixed disability income. The court date came and I literally wheeled my dad in while my uncle walked with a cane. My step-aunt is entirely able-bodied and rolling in the millions my step-grandma and grandfather worked their whole lives to earn. The judge took one look at the whole picture and she was absolutely denied access to my biological grandmother's estate. We were there for less than an hour. I have been in dispute with British Gas for around 10 years. Every now and again they take me to court. Every time I win and we go away for another few years. The last time I lawyered up, it's in a magistrate's even though it's a civil matter. My solicitor waited for the British Gas guy to swear his oath to tell the truth, the whole truth etc. Then asked him what he knew of the previous court cases. When the guy said he didn't know anything about them, my solicitor ripped into him saying he'd just claimed to tell the whole truth, so clearly nothing he says can be trusted. It went on for a few minutes. It was kind of brutal. The magistrates agreed and we walked away with $600 in costs. It was a joy to watch this bloke who was all, "We're coming to make entry to your house and the police will help," before we went in be told to sit down and not say anything else unless he was asked a question. To fend off some of the questions, it's to do with a disconnected meter at my house, for electric to a closed shop. I have written to the CEO. I've had my MP involved and been to court 4 times. British Gas don't change. Don't listen, so I've given up. I'll just go to court every now and again and claim my $600. Edit. I just remembered. They had to transfer the money electronically as we were going to send the bailiffs in, as they took 27 days to pay. TBH, I was a little disappointed when they paid up. Kind of a self-screw, but the MPAA entered DVD John's code for breaking DVD copy protection as part of their lawsuit into their evidence, which then became public record. The code that breaks DVD copy protection was now available to the entire world, defeating the entire purpose of their lawsuit. A wife filed for a restraining order because she wanted the house during divorce. Husband has good job, like 200k per year. Employer finds out about restraining order. Husband is fired. He was very specialized employee, so only job he can find closer to house. Ex-wife and daughter is 50k. House gets foreclosed. Child support at less than $500 per month. Wife has to get job as waitress. 4 cars get repossessed. Was involved in a custody case where a wife cheated on her husband and had a child as a result. She let husband believe the child was his until she was about 5 years old and they were divorcing. To stop him from getting custody, she convinced the biological father to try to get custody, thinking that if he won she would wind up with the child. Became a huge 3-way fight. Multiple sets of grandparents involved. Attorney's fees skyrocketed because the case would have been pretty quick otherwise. She couldn't pay her attorney. Tried to get the bio dad too. Got even messier. etc. Basically there still isn't an agreement all parties will follow. They are in and out of court every year or so. She screwed herself. Not a lawyer, but my dad is a physician and is sometimes called as a professional witness in cases of malpractice. In one memorable case, a family was suing a doctor for something fairly frivolous, and my dad was a witness for the defense. The lawyer representing the family was cross-examining my dad and brought up a chapter in a medical textbook and asked my dad to read a highlighted paragraph. He does, and the lawyer says something to the effect of, "So, what you just read means less than blah blah medical thing more than." My dad confidently replied, "No, it does not mean that." Lawyer, "No, but if you read this, the author clearly states less than blah blah medical thing more than." Dad, "No, really? That's not what the author means." Lawyer, "How do you know that's not what the author meant?" Dad, "Well, because I wrote it." Judge basically facepalmed while the lawyer mimicked a goldfish and stared at the author name on the chapter. Basically the best moment of my dad's professional life. Yes, ruling was in the defendant's favor. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver kills a car worth of people case at the time when they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit, one where the 2 kids and the wife had died, but the father had not, and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings and before tons of people realized that it is too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the kid, drunk driving college kid, had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry, haunted, never going to drink again, this was going to ruin his life, etc. The judge seemed to really be eating it up. Then comes my boss and immediately burns this kid's remorse to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. But there was a case going on in my town between a father and son that was hilarious. The dad is a big time personal injury attorney around here who started his own firm under his name. George Sink and his son ended up joining the family business. Well, they had a falling out, so the son goes off to start his own firm. He has his dad's name, so the dad is suing the son for using the name he gave him to start his own law firm. Had a criminal jury trial for misdemeanor criminal mischief over 4 years ago. State filed charges and kept amending the information to the point where they left the actual victim out of the trial and proceeded with the 2 eyewitnesses. Well, one of the witnesses was my client's ex and the other witness was the ex's new GF. They claimed my client vandalized the actual victim's car. Client denied everything. Well, apparently, the state and both witnesses had no idea that the ex had an outstanding warrant for not paying child support to my client, which created a motive for him to lie. Asked him if he was aware that he had a warrant out for his arrest on the stand. He didn't know. The judge excused the jurors. The bailiffs arrested the ex on the stand. State rested. Judge granted our motion for judgment of acquittal because we had good case law for the victim not being there. Client walked away free and the ex went to jail. Not caught, but it is legal adjacent. My dad is an executive safety officer at the company he works at, and one of the company's truck drivers got into an accident. The driver wasn't at fault, but it is company policy anytime a driver gets into an accident they drug test them same day, and when the results came back the guy failed the test. The guy disputed the results, so they had him retake it. When he finishes up in the testing facility's bathroom, the sample he gives them isn't warm at all. Clearly hadn't just come out of person. And in the bathroom, which they meticulously clean between each test, they find a strip of tape and like a little vial and cap thing that would have went onto a small vial kind of container. So my dad has to be on a conference call with the driver and his manager and some other relevant parties, and the guy maintains his innocence. And they can't conclusively prove the tape or cap means he cheated the test. So they're kind of at an impasse. As they're getting off the call, my father just kind of takes a shot and asks the driver really nonchalantly and in passing, say, "Doesn't taping the vial to your leg hurt? Like, how do you get it off?" And the ducking guy replies without missing a beat, "Oh no, it was just painter's tape. Comes off easy, didn't hurt at all." There was like 5 seconds of dead air after that before the guy scrambled and tried to put the toothpaste back in the tube. The company was able to fire him without any trouble. Not my case, but my dad's. He was the equivalent of a public defender decades ago. There was this guy that would get caught for being drunk in public lewdness, etc. every weekend. He seemed to draw the same judges and was pretty well known to everyone in the courthouse as an absolute lost cause. One of the regular judges had him appear in his court again. The judge is ready to give him a prison sentence because he was driving a car this time. But the guy starts crying that he finally got a job out of town and was trying to turn his life around. Judge tells him as long as he never makes a mistake in my town again he will just drop the charges. Well, sure as hell the guy shows up the following Monday. Same judge. Driving drunk again. My dad now has his case. The judge tells him he gave him his final chance, to which the guy sobs and replies, "I was leaving town, Your Honor, but my friends decided to throw me a going away party." The judge was not amused. My dad had to do everything he could to not laugh. TLDR, perpetual drunk that drove drunk gets a chance to leave town and not face charges. Gets drunk at a going away party in his honor. Drives, goes to jail. Faced the same judge both times. Not a lawyer, but this happened to my family. My husband's kids asked us to fight for full custody after years of systematic abuse from their mom. My stepdaughter was sexually assaulted and mom decided to marry a guy who was best friends with the guy who assaulted her. Mom never told us what happened, never got her counseling, never reported it to the police. In mediation she brought up a conversation I had with her which she denied ever happening until then. She started saying lie after lie, and all my husband had to say was, "My wife had that conversation with you to explain how uncomfortable my daughter is living with this man because he is connected to her sexual assault." The mediator was not amused. She said, "You have someone living in your house who is connected to your daughter's assault. Your relationship with your children is broken." She spent the rest of the session sobbing and signed away custody because this was just the tip of the iceberg that we had on her, and she knew it. Hearing her sobbing made me so happy after all she put these kids through. I had to walk my stepdaughter into the police station to report a sexual assault. I usually don't want people to suffer, but after warning her this guy was coming between her and her kids and then her lying about the context of that conversation, I'll make an exception. I tried to stop her from the chain of events that lead us to court and she tried to use it against me. Wasn't there one where in a divorce case the husband asked to have custody of their pet cats and the wife had them put down out of spite? A witness for the plaintiff in a civil suit, who was a co-worker of the plaintiff, testified very strongly against the company and in favor of the plaintiff. I questioned her about bias toward the plaintiff. If they knew each other well, were friends, etc. She said, "No, just friendly co-workers. Work friends at best." I pinned her to it. When I got a chance to cross-examine the plaintiff, she had no choice but to burn her witness's credibility, because not only were they very close friends, but they had become sisters-in-law just a few years before. No, they did not have the same last name or anything, but I had done my homework. I still don't get why people want to fight small bias by destroying their credibility, but it happens more than you think. Lady brought a frivolous case to get out of a contract she signed. She lost. then sued the attorney and the witnesses for conspiring against her. They got her case dismissed and an award of attorney's fees which she refused to pay. Lawyer recorded it as a lien on her house and scheduled a foreclosure sale, which caused her mortgage lender to declare a default and accelerate entire mortgage balance. Lawyer made a side deal with lender to pay them all proceeds of the sale and then sold her house on courthouse steps to highest bidder and then arranged for sheriff to forcibly eject her onto the street with her. She's homeless now. Short story, honor your contracts and don't sue your lawyer when you don't. I'm a paralegal. The best situations are when we get a sovereign citizen, someone in the USA who thinks that the US laws do not apply to them for a vast variety of reasons, hire us but won't let us do anything on their case. We've had to actually fire a bunch of clients because they have gone against our rules, like, don't send a letter to the judge, don't write your own motions, don't announce that you're not Mark Smith because Mark Smith has capital letters and you were born with lowercase letters, etc. Honestly, a whole thread on these people wouldn't be enough. Someone I knew had a pro-dio case where she had to defend a person who had been charged with a criminal offense, don't know what, confidential and whatnot. Even though the police and DA could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime. Circumstantial at best. She had instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial. As from experience, the client sometimes does not know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a pro-dio case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to her client. He asks if the client had something to add to the plea. Client looks at her, back at the judge. Tears well up in his eyes and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client, now convict. Apparently, she basically got screwed by her own client, who screwed himself even worse. Edit. Pro-dio is the old term in our jurisdiction. Same connotation as pro bono. Basically all custody battles where neither parent is a legitimately horrible person. Parent everyone is better off without. The kids always get screwed. This won't be the worst, but maybe it is from the guy's POV. I'm in court for one of the first times after passing the bar exam and handling a routine child support case. The events that transpire do not involve my client from that day. When one party is unrepresented in family court, in Massachusetts, there is a pre-trial meeting with the probation officers so they can assist the judge in framing the case. These probation officers are trained social workers who act as mediators in these instances. So nothing like criminal probation officers. So these two parties are meeting. You can see the guy is just angry over everything, but they are making progress working out the divorce. Then all of a sudden he stands up and throws his chair over and yells, "Duck you, Kim. You took my house. You took my kids. You even took my ducking dog. I will ducking kill you if you think you are keeping my name too, you ducking whore." Within seconds he is restrained by court guards and escorted to a private room. He ended up being arrested for threatening to kill her, all because she wanted to keep his last name instead of going back to her maiden name to make it easier on the kids. Edit. For those wondering, the judge ended up moving forward that day with their case and she got everything she wanted. Him being arrested for disorderly conduct during the pre-trial meeting was held to be his fault for missing the pre-trial conference, which means in mass the judge can dissolve the marriage that day if one party is present and the other is not. Now but, a friend kept meticulous records of how much time his estranged wife spent with their daughter. He used pink highlighter for mom and blue highlighter for himself. Mom sailed into arbitration demanding full custody and handsome child support in the house. Dad pulled out 3 years' worth of year-long calendars. Mom had spent less than a full month with the child in 3 years. Mom was not happy with the outcome. Well, the guy screwed himself technically. Also not a lawyer, but I was a witness on the case. My brother was beaten by a group of guys outside a bar because one of them lived in a place my mom rented out and tried to evict him for numerous reasons. And it doesn't stick cause in BC the rules always side with the tenant. One day after this beating they were lipping off to my mom and my brother called him out on it. So him and another guy came charging. Bro had a baseball bat nearby and smacked his buddy with it. Got charged with assault with a weapon. In court the guy who got hit came in drunk and called the judge a cocksucker or asshole or something. judge told my brother I have to give you something cause you used a weapon so you get probation. Represented a guy that stole 3 trucks from his work. Only 2 were recovered before trial. He showed up to a motion hearing in the 3rd one. Here's kind of an anti-story for balance. My marriage with my ex-wife fell apart a while back and she probably cheated on me and I probably drank too much to be a good husband and we argued and separated. It could have gotten messy at this point if either of us decided to be vindictive, but at this point we knew it was over and our main priority was the kids. Custody was never an issue because the older kids could choose where they wanted to stay at any given time. They chose to stay with me most of the time, and although we arranged a timetable for the younger kids they could come and go as they pleased if they were staying with friends in the neighborhood, etc. Child support was also not an issue as I'm not a D and I'm happy to pay my share towards giving them a decent life. I don't count what it costs when they're with me and I pay half towards school costs, clothes, outings, etc. On the morning of the divorce proceedings we met for coffee before going before the judge. The judge proceeded to ask us what contracts we had signed for the mortgage, custody, child support etc. And we just said none. We had it worked out. The judge was incredulous and asked several times, "Are you sure? This is highly irregular." We still have occasional arguments on the details that we have to work out as adults, but yeah. Tomorrow I might get in from work to find one of the younger kids in front of the TV in an unscheduled visit, or I might get a text for half the cost of a school outing next week, and that's all fine by me.